Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm going to take a look at these classic paints I've managed to pick up and see how they still hold up today. So I've got Goblin Green, Snakebite Leather, Chaos Black, Enchanted Blue, Skull White, Blood Red and Sunburst Yellow. Now of course, having these classic paints from the 90s, I need something fitting to paint with them. So I've also picked up a load of old Gretchin models from the second edition Warhammer 40,000 starter set. So we're painting these up using these classic retro paints. So the first thing I've done is I primed the model white, but I've also dipped the base in some sand and primed that white as well, so we can get that classic retro second edition base look. Now the first thing I'm doing is I'm going to come in with some of the blood red. So I'm going to give the pot a shake. And break the seal for the first time in about 30 years. So we can see what the quality of the paint will be like after all this time. Is it a solid lump? Although it sounded like liquid. It looks like a very thin runny paint. This is about how I remember these colours being back in the 90s. So I'm going to take some of this paint and apply it to my palette. As you can see, it's very runny, very thin. Just got to apply a little bit of water just to see if it's needed, just to thin it a little bit so it flows nice and smoothly off my brush. And now I'm going to apply this all over the fabric areas to the model. Now I'm being really careful, trying to not get this over any areas that I don't want to be blood red, because the coverage on these paints isn't fantastic. But I remember from back in the day that if you do get some of this over an area that you don't want to be, it can be really hard to paint over with a different colour. So I'm being nice and neat, just applying a thin layer of blood red all over the model. For such an old paint, it is flowing really smoothly. And the coverage isn't too bad actually. Like, it will need a couple of coats to build up to a solid layer, but I'm not seeing huge amounts of the white primer showing through underneath. So I really did love these models back in the day. I know they don't hold up quite as well to the modern GW style of miniatures. They're very monopose, very basic, but there's a real charm to these old hand-sculpted models from the 90s. So you can see here I'm just carefully picking out all of the clothing to this Gretchin with a layer of blood red. It is flowing really smoothly, applying quite nicely, and just make sure I only get the clothing with blood red. And after the first layer, you can see it is quite patchy coverage. The paint is very thin. You can still see quite a lot of the primer showing through. So I'm going to come in with a second layer and build up to a more solid base coat of blood red. So once again, I'm still keeping this just over the fabric areas, just applying some blood red over the layer we just applied, building up to a nice solid colour. So now I have these classic Citadel paints. Are there any comparisons you'd like to see me make with more modern paint lines out there, seeing how they hold up colour-wise to ones that are supposed to be exact matches? Let me know in the comments down below if you'd like to see that. And after that second layer of blood red, you can see we've got a nice solid base coat of red all over the fabric. So the next thing I'm going to pick out is his gun. So for this I'm going to open up my snakebite leather. I've given this a shake already, so I'm just going to break that seal. See what the quality of the paint is like. So these slids are really solid on these paints. This is probably why they're still liquid after all of this time. I don't know how they were stored before I managed to get my hands on them. I'm going to guess they were in a dark space somewhere, so they haven't dried out. So you see this snakebite leather, it's another thin paint. The coverage looks to be a little bit better than with the blood red. So I'm going to apply this all over the gun, so it looks like he's got a wooden casing to his gun. Once again, the coverage isn't fantastic. It's very patchy, very thin, so I'll be coming back through with a second layer of snakebite leather afterwards until I build up to that solid base coat that I want all over the casing to his gun. I'm also going to catch his belt at this stage as well, just to break up that red a little bit and give us another band of colour on the model. This will probably take a couple of layers to get solid coverage, but after a couple of layers I should get a solid colour of snakebite leather. And after a few layers, you see I've built up to solid coverage of snakebite leather. It's given a really nice rich brown colour to the gun and his belt. So now we're going to bust open the paint everyone has fond memories of, Goblin Green. This is what I'm really excited to try. Love this colour, and it is the true colour of 90s miniatures. So hopefully this one is liquid. And yet, it's nice, smooth, flowing paint in that pot. So I'm going to apply some of this to my palette again. So it's got that beautiful light green colour we all know from Goblin Green. It's flowing nice and smoothly off of my brush. So I'm going to apply it to all of the skin of the model. Obviously being really careful around all the other colours we've already painted. Just picking out all of the parts of the Gretchin's flesh. So it's his face and his arms and his hands. Going to catch these with a couple of layers of Goblin Green. As with all of these paints, the coverage isn't fantastic on the first pass, but with 2 or 3 layers you can build up to a nice solid colour with all of these paints. Now I'm picking out all of the flesh with this Goblin Green, bringing back great memories of painting miniatures in my youth. And after a couple of layers, you see I've got that solid Goblin Green colour all over the skin. And with the red and the green, he's really getting that 90s look to this model. So now I'm going to test out the Enchanted Blue. So far, all of these paints have been in good order. Hopefully we can continue that trend through all of them. I mean, this lid here is really stiff, which is a good sign that the paint will be in good condition. And yet, there is might need another shake just to fully mix it up, but it's still liquid inside that pot. So I'm applying this to my palette. Once again, it's just flowing smoothly. Really nice consistency. So now I'm going to apply it to this little bit of fabric hanging down from his waist, just to break up those colours a little bit and add some interest to the model. Obviously be really careful around all of the other colours we've already painted. Just going to catch this little tabard part with a few layers of enchanted blue. And I'm also going to paint this band going around the top of his hat as well. The reason I'm picking out this band before the rest of the hat is I'll be doing the rest of the hat in black. And with how these paints are, it'll be a lot easier to paint the lighter colours first, so we don't have to try and paint over any of the black, because this coverage is not fantastic, so it's way easier to paint it over the white primer. And after a couple of layers of enchanted blue, I've got a solid layer all over that tabard and the band on his hat. So now the next colour I'm going to come in with is Sunburst Yellow. Now I have memories of this paint having awful coverage when I was a child, which is where I think a lot of the myths about yellow paint come from. So it looks okay in the pot. It's nice and bright yellow colour. So I'm going to apply some of this to my palette. And as you can see, it's very thin. You can still see the palette pad showing through. Before I've even applied any of the models, this is going to take quite a few layers. So I'm going to apply this over the skull on the hat to the Gretchin. This is where we used to paint things that would be gold, yellow in those second edition colour schemes, like the shoulder pads on Ultramarines. So I'll paint this skull here yellow, as well as the band going around his arm. And I'm also going to paint the buckle as well. Now as you see, this coverage really is poor. It's going to take several layers to build up to a solid colour. And where I'm painting over the brown that I painted on his buckle originally, the coverage really isn't great. It doesn't show through, so it's going to take several layers to build to a solid colour. But after a few layers, you can see we have built up to a solid bright yellow colour. It just takes a little bit of work, but you can get solid coverage with these old yellow paints. So now with a little bit of skull white. Now these paints can obviously go very chalky, whites especially so over years. There's one of them that is going to have faults. I think it would be this one. But no, look at that, it's still a nice smooth paint even after all this time. So I'm applying some of this to my palette. And with this, I'm just going to pick out the teeth to the Gretchin. I mean, really careful. I'm just picking out the raised details of the teeth. The coverage isn't that bad. So if ever you do make mistakes using these old paints over any other areas of the model, you can always tidy back up with some white on the pot. But with that white line, it only took about 2 layers on the teeth to get a solid white colour. There's just one more of these classic paints left to test out, and that is Chaos Black. Although there isn't a label on this pot, I can tell it's Chaos Black. So I'm going to break the seal. See, it's that nice rich dark black colour that I remember from Chaos Black. As a child, I remember this paint having really good coverage. So I'm going to pick out any of the last details I want to be black. So it's going to be his boots, his hat, and the pouches on his waist. See, this flows on really nicely. It does give good coverage. Just 2 layers should be enough to get a solid black colour all over these areas. But obviously with this you want to be really careful around other colours, because it will be hard to paint back over them with other colours later. So after picking out pouches nice and carefully, I'm also going to apply this to his helmet. It's got all these flaps coming down here, so I'm going to carefully apply some Chaos Black to all of these areas, ensuring I don't get any of this over the Goblin Green or the Blood Red. And of course I'm going to paint the top of his helmet, but leaving the spike white for now. Also be really careful here around the yellow. The last thing I want to have to do is try and paint that yellow back over this. So I'm just going to make sure I apply a couple of layers of Chaos Black to all of these final details, so I get a nice solid colour of Chaos Black all over the boots, pouches and helmet. And with that Chaos Black applied, you can see in a couple of layers I've really built up to a solid black colour all over those areas. So now I'm coming in with some Lead Belcher. Unfortunately there wasn't Mithril Silver in the set of paints I picked up, so I've got to use the modern Lead Belcher just to paint in the metallics. It would have been nice to use the classic Mithril Silver, but there wasn't any available where I picked up these ones. Maybe one day I'll manage to get my hands on a pot of Mithril Silver. For now I'm just picking out the metallic details with a little bit of Lead Belcher. It's the magazine, the muzzle to the gun, and this spike on his helmet. And with that Lead Belcher applied, that is all of the base coats applied to our Gretchin. So now it's time to create some shades using these classic paints. So for the first shade, I'm going to mix some Goblin Green with a bit of Chaos Black. So you can see here it's about 3:1 ratio. I don't want this to be too dark. I'm going to mix the two colours together till I've got a darker version of the Goblin Green. Now I'm going to thin this down with a lot of water, so it's got the consistency of a shade paint, so it will flow into all of the recesses. And now I'm going to carefully apply this all over the areas of skin. It's one of the only shades that I'm going to do as an all over shade. The rest of them I'll do as pin shades to selected areas. But for the skin, I just want to shade this all over the Goblin Green, so it will sink into the recesses and add definition to that skin. Now with some Blood Red and a bit of Chaos Black. This is about 3:1 ratio again. I'm going to mix the two colours together till I get this really dark red colour. Once again, I'm going to apply lots of water to really thin this down to that consistency of a shade paint. And now I'm going to pin shade this into all of the recesses on the fabric. So wherever there's a recess or a fold or anything like that, I'm coming in with some of this shade and applying it into all of those recesses to add some definition to all of this fabric. You can be very selective with this shade, applying it just where you want. But by doing this as a pin shade, it means you won't have to come back through with blood red and highlight all the rest of the areas. So it'll take a little while now, but will probably save us time in the long run. And now with some snakebite leather and chaos black. Just a little bit of chaos black now to this snakebite leather. Going to darken this down to create a dark brown colour. And add lots of water again to get that shade paint consistency. And now I'm going to apply this into all of the recesses of his gun. So into these lines here on the front, as well as around all of the bolts. Apply a little bit of this shade paint as a pin shade, just to pick out these details and add definition all over his weapon. Was you nice and careful with this, just apply this to all of the recesses. This will really add depth and definition to his gun. I'm also going to apply it very lightly all over the skull on his helmet, just to add some definition to that skull. And now with some enchanted blue and snakebite leather, I'm going to make a dirty blue colour to shade the blue fabric. So it's just darkened down a little bit with that snakebite leather. Once again, I'm adding lots of water. Now I'm just going to carefully apply this all over the blue fabric, so it'll sink into those recesses and darken those areas down. And with just some pure chaos black, I'm going to make the Nuln Oil style shade for the metallic details. So I'm just thinning some chaos black down with lots and lots of water so it flows really smoothly. And will sink into any of the recesses on the metallic detail. So with this chaos black shade, so I'm just painting this all over the magazine and the muzzle to the gun, so it'll sink into any of those recesses, add a little bit of definition to all of these areas.
If you enjoyed the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you would like to support the channel and become a member, please press the join button down below.
And now it's time to start highlighting. So I'm coming in with some Goblin Green first. I'm going to apply this on all the raised details of the skin. So wherever shape we've made has settled into the recesses, like here around the fingers, and on any of the recesses on the arms, coming in on all of the raised areas, but leaving that shade in all the recesses, bringing the Goblin Green back up to its bright original colour. Also going to do this on the face, which is where the shade has really done its work. So as you can see, it's picked out every one of those details on the Gretchin's face. So once again, I'm applying all of the raised details with a thin layer of Goblin Green. Doing the same to his ears as well. Just bringing all of those raised areas back up to their original colour. And with that Goblin Green applied, you can see we've got the shade showing in all of the recesses. We've brought the raised details back up to their brighter colour. And now I'm mixing some Goblin Green with a little bit of Skull White So this will create a nice brighter version of our Goblin Green. And this I'll be using to highlight the skin. So I'll focus this onto the most raised parts. Things here like his knuckles. Just going to catch these with a small spot of this light mix, as well as any prominent lines or edges of any details on the skin. I'm applying a small thin edge highlight of this lighter colour. So on the face I'm going to do things like the tip of his nose, his eyebrows and cheeks, and all of these raised details you can see. I'm just catching them all with a small spot of this lighter Goblin Green. I'm going to apply it over his bottom lip and his chin, as well as the edges to the ears as well. I'm just applying an edge highlight of this lighter colour to all these areas. And once that's applied, you can see it's really made that skin stand out. An added interest all over that face. So now it's time to pick out the eyes. So for this I'm coming in with some Chaos Black first, which I'm going to very carefully sink this into the recesses. Obviously you don't want to get this over any of the other areas of skin. I'm just going to paint those eyes with a little spot of Chaos Black. And now with some Skull White. I'm just going to paint a small line within that Chaos Black. These are really small details, so use a really small brush and be nice and careful at this stage. And finally with some Chaos Black again, I'm going to apply a small vertical line in the middle of the white we just applied, and this will act like a pupil. Now with some Blood Red and Sunburst Yellow, I'm going to make a highlight for the red. The reason I'm using yellow here instead of white is because I don't want this colour to go to pink. I'd rather it be a more orangey colour. So by mixing the Sunburst Yellow with the Blood Red, get a nice highlight colour for all of the fabric. So for this I'm just applying it on all the raised areas of the fabric. So where we applied the pin shade to shade all of the fabric areas, we didn't need to come back in with Blood Red to highlight. So I'm applying some of this in the middle of all the large areas of Blood Red, all the upward facing surfaces, areas that would catch the light the most. I'm just applying a bit of this mix to all of these areas, just to brighten them up a bit and add some interest all over the model. See, it's only a very subtle colour shift from the Blood Red, but it really does make a difference after a couple of layers. With that mix applied, you can see it's brightened up some areas of that fabric. We've still got our shaded areas, the pure Blood Red, and our highlight colour visible. So now I'm adding some more Sunburst Yellow into that mix. This will really push it to a much brighter colour now, almost to the shade of current Wild Rider Red. And now I'm going to apply this very carefully to all the most raised details and prominent folds. So I'm applying this as an edge highlight just on the sharpest parts, edges of all the details. I'm just going to apply a thin edge highlight of this mix at the edges of all of the details. Just keep these lines nice and thin. Just carefully work your way around the model, applying a bit of this on all the most raised and prominent details. with that mix applied, you can see we've really brightened up that fabric and given it definition and highlights. So now it's time to highlight the blue. For this, I'm using some enchanted blue and some skull white. So I'm just going to mix the two colours together to create a really bright and vibrant blue. For this, I'm just going to pick out the most prominent creases on his tabard with a thin edge highlight of this mix. And I'm also going to pick out the tops and bottoms of the band going around his helmet. Keeping these lines nice and thin, and just applying a smooth edge highlight of this light blue. And with that blue highlight applied, the next thing I'm going to highlight are all of the brown details. So for this, it's snakebite leather and white. I'm mixing the two colours together on my palette until I get a nice light brown colour. So I've not used these paints in a really long time, so it's been interesting working out how they work together, how they mix. Things that I used to know, like the back of my hand as a child, it's been so long since I've used them. Got to relearn how these paints work again. And with this mix, I'm just applying it as an edge highlight to all of the areas of the gun, picking out all the raised details with a thin edge highlight of this skull white and snakebite leather mix. I'm also going to pick out any of the details on the belt as well with a little bit of this mix. As you can see, these paints do flow really nicely even once they're mixed. When they're mixed, they do keep their colours as well without going so desaturated as a lot of the modern GW paints do. And after that brown mix has been applied, there's only a couple of colours left to highlight on this model. So the next one will be Chaos Black and Skull White mix, which I'm going to mix together to make a nice grey colour for highlighting all the areas of black. So just mix those two colours together until you get a grey colour that you're happy with. Now I'm going to paint this on all of the raised details of any of the black. So on his feet here, it's all of these creases, on his shoes, just catching these with a bit of this grey mix. And on the helmet, I'm going to be working my way around the edges of each of these details, just catching them with a thin edge highlight of this grey. Just be nice and careful, keeping these lines nice and small. I'm doing the same on the pouches, all of the raised details and edges, just catching with a little bit of this grey. And with all of those black details highlighted, the only thing I'm going to do here is to highlight any of the metallic parts. And for this, I'll be using Stormhost Silver, because I don't trust mixing Lead Belcher with one of these old paints. Don't know what the result will be. I don't want to ruin this classic model, so I'm just applying a little bit Stormhost Silver as an edge highlight to all of the metallic details, just to brighten them up and give them the impression of light catching. And with that Stormhost Silver applied, one thing left to do, and that is to paint a hole in his gun. So for this, I'm coming in with some Chaos Black and just applying it as a small spot in the middle of the barrel to his gun. And with that black painted, that is this model painted and highlighted. There's a classic 2nd edition model. I've got to paint that base. So for this, I'm coming in with Goblin Green. And I'm going to carefully paint this all over the base of the model. This is why I applied the sand earlier. So it's all primed white. I'm just going to come in with some Goblin Green and apply it all over the base, working it into the recesses and the details. This is going to take a couple of layers to get a solid Goblin Green colour on the base. Obviously be really careful when you're around areas like the feet. You don't want to get the Goblin Green over the details we've already painted, but just apply a few layers of Goblin Green all over the base until we've got a solid Goblin Green colour over all of that sand, so there's none of the white primer showing. At this stage I'm also going to paint a couple of layers of Goblin Green around the rim of the base. Although we'll have to tidy this up again later, it's good to get a layer of Goblin Green down now, just to make it quicker later on. Once that base has been painted, we've got a solid Goblin Green colour all over the base. The next thing we're going to do is come in with some Sunburst Yellow. And I'm going to lightly dry brush this all over the sand on the base. Obviously be really careful around the feet. We're just catching the tops of the sand with a dry brushing of Sunburst Yellow. This will give that classic 2nd edition look to our base. And after that dry brush, you can see it's added some interest to the Goblin Green top of the base. Now the final step is just to tidy up that rim. So for this I'm coming back in with some Goblin Green again. I'm going to apply a couple of layers of Goblin Green all over the rim to the base. And this effect will give us that classic 2nd edition base that's so iconic from issues of White Dwarf from the 90s. And with that rim tidied up, that is how I painted this classic 2nd edition Gretchin model using the classic paints from the time. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know in the comments down below, are there any other paint lines you would like to see me take a look at, or any classic models you would like to see me paint up with these Citadel paints. But please don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting!